The Sukkah, Perek Hamish Na'alef, here we go. The previous parak we learned about the mitzvah of Nisach Hamayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach every morning of Sukkot. The water for this mitzvah was drawn from the Shileach spring very early in the morning before daybreak. During the previous night, great festivities were held in the Ezras Noshim in the Beit HaMikdash in preparation for drawing the water. This celebration was called the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, which literally means the joy of the house of the drawing. It was given this name based on the pasuk in Yeshaya, Shavta Mayim B'Sasayin, and it refers to the Beis HaShe'eva is referring to the place where the festivities were held. And we're going to describe what the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva was, even though the Gemara says it wasn't describable. But let's go. The Mishnah stated the flute is played either on 5 or days of Sukkot or on 6 days of Sukkot. This refers to the playing of the flute at the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. Even though many more types of musical instruments were played at the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, as we mentioned previously, the Mishnah singles out the flute because it could be heard over other instruments. It was the main instrument, so to speak, and it would almost like direct the band, so to speak. Like when the flute stopped, that's when everybody stopped. Nishma koilo yosem and acherim nikru kulam al shmoi. She'enu doiche loyes ha-Shabbos v'loyes ha-Yontif. The Chalil of the Beis HaShe'eva doesn't override the halachas of Shabbos or Yontif. Playing a musical instrument is also on Shabbos and Yontif. The Chachamim answered playing a musical instrument on Shabbos and Yontif for fear that it will break, and someone will repair it, which may be makabeh patish or boine or something like that, which would be some kind of Issa D'Oraisa. Therefore, it wasn't played on the first night of Yontif, leaving only 6 nights. And if Shabbos fell during Chol Hamoed, it was played only on 5 nights. Before describing the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, the Tana makes a general statement. Amru kol misha lo yira Simchas Beis HaShe'eva lo yira simcha miyamav. They said that anyone who didn't see the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva never saw true rejoicing in his life. A big part of that had to do with the fact that it's not at random that we have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot all in a row. The idea is it's a build-up. It's a build-up. The avoid of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is tshuva miyira. The avoid of Sukkot with the Talmidim is tshuva me'ava. And the idea is like this: if a person goes to battle, if an army goes to battle, when they go, they always have this fear that they don't know if they'll come back, they don't know if they'll be matzliach, they don't know how it's going to work. We know that in Rosh Hashanah we're judged. We know that on Yom Kippur we get a kapara, Bez Hashem. And Sukkot is weiter, still time of tshuva, but it's tshuva miteich simcha. The idea is that if you look at the Gemara, when the Tanoim and Amayram were discussing what happened and what they said and what they sang about by the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, it was all about doing tshuva, continuing tshuva, never stopping to do tshuva. And Ashrei Misha Leichata, Misha Chata, Yashav Yimcha Loi, V'chulu, but it was all done with tremendous simcha and celebration. And that's what brought about the simcha, was the kaparas ha'avaynis. It was bigger because of tshuva, and because of the kaparas ha'avaynis, we're celebrating that as well. And that has to do with the Mayim Al-Yanim and the Mayim Taftanim that we spoke earlier. Mishnah Beis B'Motzei Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. The Mishnah teaches how the Kehanim and Levim prepared for the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva at night, as soon as the first day of Yontif ended. Yardu Ezras Noshim, they went down to the Ezras Noshim, which was lower on the Har HaBayis than the main Azara. And they made an arrangement there that was of great benefit. They built balconies along the walls of the Ezras Noshim, for which the women watched the celebration, leaving the men to watch the celebration from below. This arrangement of balconies was a great benefit because the women were out of sight of the men, which prevented frivolity. There were golden candelabras there. Each candelabra was 50 amas high, and basically close to 2 feet. An am is 2 feet, so 150 amas would be a little less than 100 feet. And there were 4 golden bowls on top of each one, and there were 4 ladders for each candelabra, a ladder for each bowl. There were 4 youths from the young Kehanim for each candelabra, a youth for each ladder and bowl. And their hands were pitchers of oil that contained a total of 120 loig, 30 loig in each pitcher. The Mishnah gives a total of 120 to allude to Moshe, who lived for 120 years, and the radiance of the Torah taught by Moshe shines upon the Yidden like the light of these candelabras. Now, what shaykh is where does that come in? But what do we learn about on Simchas Torah? What do we learn about over Sukkot? We learn with this bracha. This is the bracha. It's going into the new year, so to speak, going into this Truva Me'ava. We want to take with us the brachas of Moshe Rabbeinu. Shehein matilum l'chol seifel. The seifel, they carried up the ladder, is important to each one of the bowls. Each youth had to be strong enough to climb to the top of the ladder while carrying 30 lug of oil. 30 lug are between 2 and 4 gallons. The volume of oil weighs between 20 and 35 pounds. It's pretty heavy. Not crazy heavy, but pretty heavy. Mishnah Gimel. From the worn out trousers of the Kohanim and their belts, they tore off strips of material which they made into wicks. And with them they lit the candelabras. There was not a courtyard in Yerushalayim that was not lit from the light of the Simchas Beis Yeshiva. The candelabras were 50 amos high, and they stood on the Har Habayis, which rose above the city of Yerushalayim. Since they were at such a height, it was possible for the light to reach the entire city. It wasn't walled, it was above the wall, so to speak. And there's a shaila of being nana from this light, because the Gemara says that an Isha was able to check her chitim in there to make sure there's nothing in there. And Koil Mara V'Reach Ein Behem Rishon Me'ila, which is a big sugim psachim on Daf Chav Hey, and which is done on these shailas. Okay. Mishnah Dalet, here we go, describing the festivities themselves. Chasidim Anshe Ma'isa Hayu Merakdim Lefneim Bavuka Shel Arbi Yedayim. Pious men and men of good deeds would dance before them, the people who came to watch, juggling flaming torches in their hands. Some juggled 4 torches at once, some juggled 8. The Gemara says that some people juggled eggs, some people juggled cups of wine that didn't spill. Only Chasidim Anshe Ma'isa, who wouldn't become frivolous, were allowed to perform. Everyone else just watched and listened. So they would say words of song and praise before them. What would they say? Yesh mehem shayu oimrim. This is what we were talking about before. There were those of them that would say, Ashri aldu seinu like baisha ziknu seinu. Praise, happy is our youth that hasn't shamed our old age. Those who were bali tshuva, elu chasidim anshe ma'isa. Those were the pious men and men of good deeds. Yesh hayu oimrim ashri ziknu seinu shekipra liadu seinu elu bali tshuva. Happy is our old age that has atoned for our youth. Meaning we did have various when we were younger, and now we're not doing various anymore. We're doing tshuva for that. Elu ve'elu amrim asher misha lechata misha chata yoshu v'yimchaloi. But all of them said together, happy is he who didn't sin, as well as he who did sin but was forgiven. Meaning that the Chasidim, the Anshe Ma'isa, the Tzadikim, the Bali Tshuva here means real Bali Tshuva, not today what we call a BT. A Bali Tshuva could be a from person too. Just brings to mind what Rashi says in Parsha Shlach. Rashi says that when Moshe Rabbeinu came up to Shemayim, he was talking about after the Parsha of Meraglim, so it says, Hashem Arach HaPayim. So Moshe sees Hashem writing in the Torah, Hashem Arach HaPayim. So Moshe says, oh, for the tzaddikim. It's that, So Hashem says, no, for the tzaddikim and for the Rishon. So Moshe says, what's that? Arach HaPayim should be for the tzaddikim. Why should it be for the Rishon? So Hashem says, Hashem tells him something along the lines of, you may come to use it one day. But then, when Moshe Rabbeinu saw that they were chaytei by the Chet HaEgel and they were chaytei by the Meraglim, Ismaila, that's when Moshe says, now I understand why we need to have Erech HaPayim for tzaddikim, as well as for Hashem, or for Hashem even more than for the tzaddikim, because they were good people that got schlepped up in sin over here. They needed a kapara and they needed Erech HaPayim. Hashem says, even though you told me that should really be for the tzaddikim, now you know why we need it for tzaddikim and for Hashem. So everybody's together. That's what the Simchas Beis Yeshiva is celebrating, that everybody has the ability to do tshuva. Min ha'toivos asher heitev Hashem yisbarach and bruav, as Rabbeinu Yonah starts off the Sefer Shari Tshuva, that one of the greatest things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for the creation was He created the power of tshuva. So everybody should chaperayim, everybody could chaperayim, should chaperayim. There's a mitzvah deraisa to do it. Okay, enough gedarshant. Ma'alaviyim, b'kinoros, b'nevalim, b'mentaltayim, b'chatzaytros, b'klei shir b'loi mispar. The Levium played harps, lyres, cymbals, trumpets, and countless other musical instruments. While standing on the 15 steps that led down from the Ezras Yisrael, which was an 11 amma wide strip that ran along the eastern wall of the Azara from north to south. Someone who wasn't a kohen was usually allowed only in that part of the Azara, not any closer to the Mizbeach, to the Beis HaMikdash. And Keneged Chamisha Osir Shir Hamalas Tehillim, which corresponded to the 15 Shir Hamalas that are in Sefer Tehillim. Each of the 15 consecutive kapitlich in Tehillim begin with the word Shir Hamalas, besides what Kuf Chaf Aleph starts with Shir Lamalos. People have to be careful. People say Shir Hamalas, it's Ein Elohim. It doesn't say there's no such possible and find it anywhere in Tanakh. You have to say Shir Lamalos over there. On which the Levim stood with musical instruments and chanted words of song. The Levim stood on the steps only at the Simchas Beis Sheva, because for the Karbanos they performed on a platform next to the Azara, Eitzel HaMizbeach Hoya. And we know from the Gemara says, Vus Ep is 15 Shir Hamalas, Vus Ep is 15 steps, because when David HaMelech was digging, this is going to go back to what we talked about before with the Maya. When David HaMelech was digging to dig the foundation of the Beis HaMikdash, he hit a live spring, and the water kept coming up and up and up and up and up, and it started flooding the whole area. He didn't know what to do, and he took a piece of clay and he wrote a Shem Hashem on it, and he said, Madach, to save one family, you're allowed to erase the Shem Hashem, to save the whole place, to save the whole world that was starting to get flooded. So you could throw in this piece of clay. So he threw in this piece of clay and the water went down. The problem was the water went down way too far. So he said 15 Shir Hamalos, and lifted up the waters to the proper place. Simchas Beis Sheva continued through the night until the time arrived for the procession to the Shiloach to draw the water for the Nisach Hamayim. The Mishnah describes how the procession began. Two Kohanim stood at the Shara Elyon, which was also known as Shara Nikanor, at the top of the 15 steps that led down to the Ezras Yisrael, from the Ezras Yisrael to the Ezras Noshim. And they had two trumpets in their hands. Korah HaGever, Toku Ve'riu V'Toku, when the announcer called out. The morning was, a Kohen was appointed to announce each morning before daybreak that all the Kohanim should wake up to do the Avodah. Kohanim L'Avoidasam, Leviyim, L'Shiram, L'Zimra. It's probably where the Lashon comes from in davening. Toku Ve'riu V'Toku, Korah HaGever means the man, could also mean the time when the rooster would crow, as we know from the Gemara Yuma. The announcer called out, and they blew a tekiah, a trua, and a tekiah on their trumpets, and they began to go down the steps. Higiu l'mayla asirus toku ve'riu toku. When they reached the 10th step, this was either the 10th step from the top or maybe the 10th step from the bottom, they again blew a tekiah, trua, and a tekiah. Higiu la'azaro toku ve'riu toku. When they reached the floor of the Ezras Noshim, again they blew a tekiah, trua, and a tekiah. Hayutaken v'halkan shemagim l'shara yetzel l'mizrach. They continued blowing, they prolonged the notes, as they followed by the people, marched across Ezras Noshim until they reached the Shar at the far end that led out to the east. Meaning everybody was probably singing along with them. When they reached the gate that led out from the east of the Ezras Noshim, they turned their faces to the west. So they faced the Kodesh and they said, our forefathers stood in this place with their backs to the Heichal Hashem, facing the east, and they bowed eastward towards the sun. At the end of the Tkufa, the first Beis HaMikdash, there were Yidden who worshipped the sun. In a gesture of disrespect, they turned their backs to the Beis HaMikdash and bowed towards the sun in the east, as the state in Yechezkel. It's very interesting when you learn through Nach and you see all the different Avodah Zaras that they were doing and what the different powers they believed in. It's also very interesting. It's not really the makom over here, but once we're talking about it, it's kedai to mention. The Pashtus is, the people in the times of the Nevi'im weren't completely parkei oil. They weren't fried. They served Avodah Zarah together with doing other from things. It's pretty clear in the psukim like that, actually. But, not for now, but Mitzvah, we'll talk about it in our Navi Shiurim, Bezos Hashem Nether. Rabbi Yehuda, v'anu l'ka'inenu. But as for us, our eyes are turned towards Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ayushayim v'aimrim anu l'ka'inenu. They chanted the following words repetitively. We bow down to Hashem, thanking Him for what He has done for us in the past. And our eyes are turned towards Hashem, hoping for His Yeshuas in the future. Ka is one of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then they proceeded to the Shiloach, and they would draw the water for the mitzvah of Nisach Hamayim. The procedure of drawing the water and pouring in the Mizbeach, we discussed previously in Perek Dal, Mishnah Tes and Yud. Mishnah Hey. We learned that the Chatzotzos were blown several times in the Beis Hamikdash in the days of Sukkot. They were blown during the procession of going to the Shilech V'Nisach Hamayim, when the water was brought to the Beis Hamikdash, and when the Aravis was stood against the side of the Mizbeach. Over here, the Mishnah deals with these and other times when Chatzotzos were blown in the Beis Hamikdash. In Perchim Me'etzim Yachas Tkiyas B'Hamikdash, Ve'in Moisifin Al Arba Mushmayna. We don't sound less than 21 trumpet blasts in one day, and we never do more than 48 trumpet blasts in one day. Mishnah explains, every day there were at least 21 trumpet blasts in the Beis Hamikdash. 3 for the opening of the gates of the Azara in the morning. When the Azara was opened in the morning, the trumpets were sounded, to call the people on duty for their positions. Each set of tkiya is counted as 3 blasts. 9 for the morning carbon. So it's 9 and 9 and 3. And that would be 21. And 9 in the afternoon, Tamid. As the wine of the carbon Tamid was poured on the Mizbeach, the Levim sang a kapitel that was divided into 3 parts, and at each part the Kohanim blew the trumpets 3 times and everyone bowed. Since these events took place every day, the minimum number of daily trumpet blasts in the Beis Hamikdash was 21. The Mishnah cites 2 instances of trumpets blowing that didn't occur every day. On the days when there was a Karban Musaf, Shabbos, Yom Tov, for Shchodesh, they added another 9 blasts for these karbanos. When the Nesachim for the Musafim were poured in the Mizbeach, the Levim also sang a shira that was divided into 3, and the Kohanim blew trumpets 3 times at each part. So on days when there was a Karban Musaf, there was a total of 30 blasts, 21 of every day plus 9 for the Karban Musaf. There's a mitzvah deraisa to blow the trumpets for the Karban Musaf. Steht im Pausing, Parshas Baloischa, Yom Simchaschem u'Mayadechem, Rashei Chadshechem, Skatem HaChatzotzos, Olasechem, V'Asivchei Shalnechem. On the day of your gladness, Yom Simchaschem, u'Mayadechem, and on your festivals, u'Rashei Chadshechem, and your days of Rosh Chodesh, you shall send the trumpets over your oil offerings and your shlomim offerings. This mitzvah deraisa also applies to the daily carbon tamid. Erev Shabbos. You may see in Erev Shabbos they would add 6 blasts. 3 to stop people from working. The first tkiya signaled that people working in the field should stop. The trua indicated that the shopkeepers should close their stores. And the last tkiya warned people to prepare for Shabbos by removing food from the ovens that they would eat that night, and to do hatmana for the food that they would need for the next day, and to light Shabbos candles. And 3 to divide between Shabbos and weekday, that is to inform people that Shabbos is actually starting. After the first 3 tkiyas, they waited the amount of time it takes to roast a small fish, and then they sounded the second 3 blasts to mark the beginning of Shabbos. On each Friday there were at least 27 blasts, 21 by the Tamid, plus 6 for Erev Shabbos. And if Friday was also a day of Musaf, so at least 36 were sounded, because you had the regular 27 for Erev Shabbos, plus 9 for the Karban Musaf. Unlike other trumpet blasts mentioned in our Mishnah, the 6 of Erev Shabbos were sounded not only in the Beis Hamikdash, but in every Jewish town, which is the minig that some places still have today, to make a siren before Shabbos, to be my deal when Shabbos is coming. And in some places in Eretz Yisrael, where unfortunately the siren means that there's an incoming rocket, they play Shabbos songs. Erev Shabbos, Shabbasecha, Chag Hosham Arba Mushmayin. As we mentioned before, the trumpets were blown several times on Sukkot. The Mishnah shows how on one day of Sukkot there could be as many as 48 blasts. On Erev Shabbos that fell during the Yom Tov of Sukkot, there were 48 trumpet blasts. Shalosh L'Psicha She'arim, 3 daily ones for opening the gates in the morning. Shalosh L'Shara Elyon, 3 for starting the procession to the Shiloach from the Shar Nikanor. These were trumpet blasts mentioned in the previous Mishnah that were sounded by the Kohanim standing in the Shar Nikanor. V'shalosh L'Shara Tachton, and 3 for continuing the procession to the lower gate which led out of the Beis Hamikdash. The lower gate is the gate at the eastern end of the Ezras Nashim. Although the Kohanim sounded these blasts as soon as they reached the Ezras Nashim, the Mishnah says that it was done by the lower gate because they continued blowing until they reached that gate, as we mentioned in the previous Mishnah. According to the Tan of that Mishnah, they also blew the tkiyas on the 10 steps going down from the steps. The Tan of our Mishnah, however, doesn't mention those blasts because he holds that the trumpets were not sounded then. V'shalosh l'miloi hamayim, and there were 3 more tkiyas for filling the golden flask with water drawn from the Shiloach. This refers to the 3 blasts that we mentioned in the previous parak of Mishnah Tes, which was sounded when they returned to the Beis Hamikdash through the Shar HaMayim. Then you had Teishel L'Tam Shal Shachar, 9 for the morning Tamid of every day, Teishel L'Tam Shal Ben Arbayim, and 9 for the afternoon Tamid of every day, Teishel L'Musafin, and 9 for the Karban Musaf of Sukkot, Shalish L'Haftal L'S'am and Malacha, 3 to stop people from doing work before Shabbos, Shalish L'Havdal Ben Kadosh L'Chayil, and 3 to divide between the Shabbos and weekday, and the total of all these blasts is 48. The Mishnah lists the maximum number of blasts that were sounded on one day almost every year. However, it was possible for even greater number of blasts to be sounded in a single day. On Erev Pesach, the trumpets were blown 27 times because of the Korban Pesach that was brought down. The people bringing the Korban Pesach were divided into 3 groups, as we spoke in Masechet Pesachim. Hallel was recited by the Levim 3 times for each group, and the trumpets were blown 3 times for each recitation of Hallel, making a total of 27 blasts. These were in addition to the 21 blasts of every day. So 48 blasts were sounded on Erev Pesach. So if Erev Pesach fell out on Shabbos, when the trumpets were sounded 9 times for the Musaf, the total was 57. The Mishnah doesn't take the situation into account because it's not so usual for Erev Pesach to fall out on Shabbos. It's not something that was done every year. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag, the Mishnah Vav. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag, Hoyisham Shloisha Asa Parim Be'elim Shnayim V'Sar Echad. The Kohanim were divided into 24 mishmaros, which are different groups, each of which served in the Beis Hamikdash 1 week at a time, as I state in Masechet Taanis. During its week, a mishmar had the exclusive rights to bring all the karbanos. They could prevent any other kind from participating in the services. On Yom Tovim, however, all 24 mishmaros had equal rights in the karbanos that were brought specifically because of the Yom Tov, such as the karbanos musaf. The Mishnah explains how the musafim of Sukkot were divided amongst the mishmaros. On the first day of Sukkot, the karban musaf consisted of 4 types of animals: bulls, rams, goats, and lambs. Parim, elim, kvasim, and seirim. The number of rams, goats, and lambs remained the same on every day throughout Sukkot: 2 rams, 1 goat, and 14 lambs. But the number of bulls was reduced by 1 each day. We mentioned this before. There were 13 bulls on the first day, 12 on the second day, 11 on the third, and so on, until the 7th day when only 7 bulls were offered. On most days of Yom Tov, the total number of animals exceeded the number of mishmaros, in which case some of the mishmaros that offered a lamb were also entitled to a second lamb. However, a mishmar that offered a bull, a ram, or a goat were not allowed a second animal of any type. As the Yom Tov progressed and the number of bulls decreased, fewer mishmaros offered bulls and more of them offered lambs. And as the number of mishmaros that offered lambs increased, the number that offered 2 lambs decreased. This is the cheshbainis for the different mishmaros and how it worked. So the Mishnah elaborates and enumerates what went on over here. So Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, on the first day of Sukkot, Hayusham Shloisha Asa Parim, there were 13 bulls, Ve'elim Shnayim, 2 rams, a Sari Echad, and 1 goat for the Karban Musaf. This is a total of 16 animals, 1 for each of 16 mishmaros. Nishdayrusham Arba Asa Kvasim Shmoyna mishmaros. 14 lambs were left over for the other mishmaros. Remember, there were 24 mishmaros. Therefore, on the first day, 6 mishmaros offered 2 lambs each, 12 lambs, and the other 2 mishmaros offered 1 lamb each, 2 lambs. On the second day, the number of bulls was 12. Only 12 mishmaros offered bulls. Another 3 brought to 2 rams and 1 goat. This left 9 to offer 14 lambs. On the second day, 5 of the 9 remaining mishmaros offered 2 sheep each, 10 lambs, and the other 4 offered 1 lamb. On the third day, the number of bulls was 11, so 11 mishmaros offered parim, another 3 brought elim, and 1 brought a sar. The left kvasim, 6 brought kvasim, and the other 6 brought 1 keves each. On the third day, 4 of the 10 remaining mishmaros offered 2 lambs each, and the other 6 offered 1 lamb each. On the fourth day, the number of bulls was reduced to 10. So 10 mishmaros offered bulls. Another 3 brought 2 rams and 1 goat. This left 11 to offer the 14 lambs. On the fourth day, 3 of the remaining 11 mishmaros offered 2 lambs each, and the other 8 offered 1 lamb each. B'chamishi, on the 5th day, the number of bulls was 9. So 9 mishmaros offered bulls, parim. Another 3 brought the 2 rams and 1 goat. This left 12 to offer the 14 lambs. B'chamishi, shnayim b'krivim shnayim b'shar echad. On the 5th day, 2 of the remaining 12 mishmaros offered 2 lambs each, and the other 10 offered 1 lamb each. B'ashishi echad makriv shnayim b'shar echad. On the 6th day, the number of bulls was 8. So 8 mishmaros offered bulls, and 3 brought only 2 rams and 1 goat. This left 13 to offer 14 lambs. B'ashvi kulan shavan. On the 7th day, all the remaining mishmaros were equal. That is, each of the remaining 14 mishmaros offered one lamb each, no mishmar offered two. On Shmini Atzeres, though, the musaf was entirely different. It consisted of only 10 animals. Par echad, ayil echad, sayr echad, and shiva kvasim, which is fewer than the number of mishmaros. So Bashmini, chazru l'payis kabar golim. On the 8th day, Shmini Atzeres, they went back to the method of doing a goyrel, a payis, to determine which mishmar offered an animal, as they did on the other Yom Tovim of Pesach and Shavuos. On Pesach and Shavuos, the number of karbanos of the musafim was 11. The payis was used to determine which 11 of the 24 mishmaros could offer them. The payis was discussed in the Perek Beis Masechta Yema. Omru, the Kehanim agreed amongst themselves and they said, Misha Hikrif Parim Hayom Le'Yakru L'Machar. Any mishmar that offered one of the bulls today shall not offer a par tomorrow. Elachezim Chalila. Instead, we take turns in rotation. Those who already offered bulls had to wait until after all the other mishmaros offered bulls, and then the sequence began again. The 24 mishmaros took turns to offer parim in a particular sequence listed in Divrei Hayom. The bulls were allocated as follows. On the first day, the 13 parim were mishmaros 1 through 13. The second day was 12 parim, the mishmaros of 14 to 24, and 1. On the third day was 11 parim, mishmaros 2 to 12. On the fourth day, it had 10 parims, and mishmaros 13 to 22. On the fifth day, it was 9 parim, so it was mishmaros 23, 24, and 1 through 7. On the sixth day was 8 parim, so it was from 8 to 15. And on the seventh day, 7 parim, so 16 to 22. As you could figure out, mishmar 1 offered a par on both the first and the second day, since the number of parim on the second day was 12, whereas the number of mishmaros that had not yet offered a par was only 11. There's no option but to let mishmar 1 bring a par on the second day as well. Meaning to make it equal, that everybody should get however many karbanos, exactly how many they needed. Mishnah Zayin. B'shleisha prakim b'shana hayu kala mishmar shabbos be'imuri haragolim b'chiluk lechem upon. Having discussed the right of the mishmaros to perform the avodah of karbanos brought on Sukkot, the Mishnah discusses the rights to receiving portions of the karbanos throughout Sukkot, as well as the karbanos of Pesach and Shavuos. B'shleisha prakim b'shana, 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, hayu kala mishmar shabbos be'imuri haragolim. All the 24 mishmaros were equally entitled to receiving portions of the karbanos that the Torah says must be brought on the Yom Tovim b'chiluk lechem apanim, and when the Yom Tov fell on Shabbos, they were equally entitled to portions of the lechem apanim, which was distributed every Shabbos. Every Shabbos, 12 specially shaped loaves of bread were put on the shulchan. They remained there until the next Shabbos, when they were removed and replaced with the next 12 loaves. After being removed, the loaves were divided between 2 mishmaros, the incoming mishmar and the outgoing mishmar. However, on Shabbos of Yom Tov or Chol Hamoed, they were divided equally among all 24 mishmaros. The halacha is that only the karbanos related to the Yom Tov were divided among the 24 mishmaros, while all the other karbanos were divided among the mishmar or 2 mishmaros scheduled to serve in the Beis Hamikdash that week. Nevertheless, the Gemara learns from Psukim in the Torah that the lechem apanim is a yotzei min haklal. Although the lechem apanim was not related to the Yom Tov because it was eaten every Shabbos, it was divided on the Shabbos of Yom Tov among all the mishmaros, just like the other karbanos of Yom Tov. It's interesting why it's like that. Ba'atzeres amrim lei helach matzah helach chametz. On Shavuos, they would also bring a carbon called the shtei halechem, which is literally the 2 loaves that were brought. When Shavuos fell on Shabbos, the kohen received 2 portions of bread, one from the shtei halechem because it was Shavuos, and one from the lechem apanim because it was Shabbos. So Ba'atzeres amrim lei on Shavuos that fell on Shabbos, when they gave each kohen a share of lechem apanim, which was matzah, they said to him, helach matzah, here's matzah for you. And they gave him his share of shtei halechem, which was chametz. They said to him, helach chametz, here's chametz for you. This was their way of telling each kohen that they were giving him his portions of both karbanos, and not 2 portions of the same carbon. When the lechem apanim, the shtei halechem, distributed, the kohen would take 2 shares of each carbon instead of a single share of each. He would be giving away his portion of one in exchange for a second portion of the other, which is awesome because the Torah says a kohen may not exchange his chelak of one carbon for another kohen's chelak of a different carbon. In case a kohen may be worried that he was knowingly participating in such an exchange, they told each kohen that he was receiving only his rightful portion of the shtei halechem and his rightful portion of the lechem apanim, and not 2 portions of the same item. Mishmar shezman kavua makiv timidin nedar monadav t'shar karbanos tzibur. The 24 mishmaros had equal rights in the karbanos that were brought because of the Yom Tovim. Karbanos that would have been brought in any event, the Tam Shal Shachar, Tam Shal Ben Arbayim, the Musafin of Shabbos, were offered and eaten only by the mishmar scheduled to serve that week. The Mishmar scheduled to serve that week offered the daily Tamid offerings, the Nedarim and the Davis. We know what the Nedarim and the Davis are. I'm not going to explain that people chose to bring that week and other Karbanos Tzibur that were not related to the Yom Tov. These could be, what would be a Karban Tzibur? Either a Par Helm Davar Shal Tzibur or a Seir Avodah Zarah. A Par Helm Davar Shal Tzibur is the bull for the mistaken transgression of the community. If the Sanhedrin mistakenly ruled that an act punishable by curse is mutter, and most of the people who were being Seimich and Bezdin committed that act, so a Par's B'rei Zachatos on their behalf. And the other one would be a Seir Avodah Zarah, a he-goat of idol worship. If the act in question was one of Avodah Zarah, a bull is brought as an oilo, and the he-goat is brought as a chatos. Other Karbanis Tzibur brought on the Yantif, but not related to the Yantif, is the Karban Musaf of Shabbos. Umakriv as Hakoil, and it offered all the other Karbanis that were not related to the Yantif. With these words, the Mishnah includes Ketzah Mizbeach, the dessert for the Mizbeach. When no Karbanis were being burned on the Mizbeach, they would buy Karbanis oilo with the money from the Tzibur, which was discussed in Sech Shkalim, and they were burned there so that the Mizbeach shouldn't be inactive, there should always be something going on. The Mishnah returns to discuss the distribution of Lechem Apanim. We learned before that when Shavuos fell on Shabbos, all the Mishmar shared Lechem Apanim equally. Here the Mishnah extends this halacha to Shabbos that came out immediately before or after a Yom Tov. Yom Tov hasamach l'Shabbos ben milfaneh ben milacharel, hoyu kol ha-mishmar Shabbos bechiluk Lechem Apanim. If Yom Tov fell next to Shabbos, either before, meaning Friday, or after, meaning Sunday, the Yom Tov ended on Friday or started on a Sunday, all the Mishmars were equally entitled to portions of Lechem Apanim of that Shabbos, even though that Shabbos was not part of the Yom Tov. If the Yom Tov began on Sunday, all the Kahanim who wanted to be in the Beis HaMikdash for the Yom Tov arrived in Yerushalayim before Shabbos because they couldn't travel on Shabbos. For the same reason, if Yom Tov ended on Friday, they stayed until Shabbos was over. In either case, the Chachamim were masakin that all the Kahanim in the Beis HaMikdash shared Lechem Apanim equally, just as they do on a Shabbos that falls during the festival. It's nicht kein stam chsidish shemaisa to say the Shabbos before Yom Tov, shaykh for the Yom Tov. When we call it a 3-day Yom Tov, the Mishnah is also referring to a Yom Tov. Made a big nam kimin halacha with Lechem Apanim. Lechem Apanim is a carbon. You can't just do whatever you want with it. It's not just stam showbreads to eat it when you want. Mishnah Ches. Final Mishnah of the Parak, final Mishnah of the Masechta. After teaching a halacha that applied when Yom Tov ended on Friday or started on Sunday, the Mishnah discusses what happens when a Yom Tov ended on a Thursday or started on a Monday. If one day separated between Shabbos and Yom Tov, and Yom Tov ended on a Thursday or began on a Monday, the two Mishmar scheduled to serve that Shabbos. The outgoing and the incoming Mishmars will take 10 of the 12 loaves of the Lechem Apanim. Throughout the year, each Mishmar serves for 1 week at a time, starting on Shabbos and ending the next Shabbos. On Shabbos, the outgoing Mishmar did the Avodah of the morning, and the incoming Mishmar performed the Avodah of the afternoon. Normally, these two Mishmar shared all the 12 loaves of the Lechem Apanim, but on this occasion, when many other Kahanim were present, they were given only 10 of the 12. And the Kahanim of the other Mishmars who were there in the Beis HaMikdash, either because they arrived early for the Yom Tov or because they hadn't yet left after the Yom Tov, would take 2 loaves. When the Yom Tov ended on Thursday, although the Kahanim who came to Yerushalayim for the Yom Tov could return home on Friday, some would choose to remain until after Shabbos. Similarly, if Yom Tov began on Monday, although the Kahanim could arrive in Yerushalayim on Sunday, some chose to arrive before Shabbos. The halach in all previous cases where Yom Tov falls either on Shabbos, next to Shabbos, or a day in between, are exceptions to the rule. However, on the Shabbos, so the rest of the year, the incoming Mishmar would take 6 loaves, and the outgoing Mishmar would take 6 loaves. Rabbi Yehuda says, the incoming Mishmar would take 7 loaves, and the outgoing Mishmar would take 5. Shaila is why he didn't split it equally. The outgoing Mishmar opened the She'orim of the Beis HaMikdash in the morning, so it would be fitting that they complete the service by closing them at night. Instead, it was the incoming Mishmar that closed the gates. Therefore, the incoming Mishmar was rewarded with a greater portion of the Lechem Apanim because they did more than they actually had to do. After taking the Lechem Apanim, each Mishmar divided them among its Kahanim, and this division had to be done in a particular place. And the incoming Mishmar divided their loaves in the north of the Azara, which was a more prominent section of the Beis HaMikdash, in the Makom Machatas V'Ya'oila, to display that they had recently arrived and were ready to start their Karbanos. And the outgoing Mishmar had finished their service, were ready to leave, divided their loaves in the south of the courtyard of the Azara. One of the Mishmars was punished by being deprived of certain privileges, including the right to divide its Lechem Apanim in the north of the Azara. The Mishmar of Bilga always had to divide its loaves in the south of the Azara, even when they were the incoming mishmar, meaning they couldn't sit in the place of the mokum achatas via oilo. The tabata kavua and the ring which held the animals for the karbanos in place at the time of the shechita were fastened, so they couldn't use it, and they had to use the ring of another mishmar. What's going on over here? There were rings attached to the floor of the northern side of the mizbeach. They resembled a circle with an open section that rotated through a semicircular groove in the floor. When the Kehanim were ready to shecht a carbon, they rotated the ring so that the open section faced upward, placed the animal's neck in the ring, and then rotated again so that it would lock it into the floor. And each of the 24 mishmars were assigned its own ring to use during the karbonos. And their closet, in which they stored the knives, were sealed shut so that they couldn't use it, and they had to use the closet of another mishmar. Bilga was punished because one of its daughters rebelled against the Torah, the Yidden, and the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. What's going on over here? The Konsur Rabbanim Mishamaytze Shahaya. The Chachamim gave them a knas because of a story that happened. Sheish Achas Mishmeres Bilga Miriam Bas Bilga Shma. There was a woman that was part of the mishmar of Bilga, and her name was Miriam Bas Bilga. The Shtamda. She became frei. She was shmadzich. And she married an official from the Romans, from the Greeks. And when the Greeks and the Romans broke into the Beis Hamikdash, she went and she slammed her shoe onto the Mizbeach. But Amra Lucas, she said, Wolf. Lucas means Ze'ev b'loshen Yevoni. Till when are you going to consume the money of the Jewish people by devouring their karbanos and not protect them in the time of need? And you're not going to stand up for them at the time of need. The Chachamim punished the entire Mishmar because the reason that this woman wouldn't have behaved in that way had she not heard her father disparage the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. And they were afraid that if her father had this attitude, he may have had a harmful influence on the Kehanim who served with him, for such is human behavior, as expressed by the rabbinic saying, Oil Rasha, Oil Shchene, woe to the wicked man, woe to his neighbor. And we'll end off with the Davar Toiv, Toiv LaTzadik, Toiv LaShchene, Hadron Lachem Sech Sukkah. It's Hashem to be continued with the next Masechta.